You are listening to the Bell Post. Welcome to the next episode of our podcast. We're now on episode 54. Who would have ever thought that? And today we're going to be talking about the theories of why we have crime and the theories of how we deter crime. And today we have as our guest Dr. Jennifer Wooldridge, and she is an associate professor of criminal justice and the criminal justice undergraduate coordinator in the Department of Social Sciences at UT Tyler. Dr. Wooldridge, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Bell Post.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here and happy to talk to you about our program and some of the things that we're teaching our students over here at UT.
Well, I saw that in 2023, y'all's Department of Criminal Justice received national recognition from the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. That was a very hard-earned award, very competitive with many schools across the country, and something that we're very, very proud of. If I could just speak a little bit about it, our program has been trying to implement a stronger forensic science track to our major, and that award was part of the process of us just trying to expose the community and our students to a little bit more of the forensic science side of things. So the award we actually got for what we called our UT Tyler murder mystery event. So myself and colleagues, we went around town and we got local businesses to buy into the idea that they should let us donate, or they should donate us a modular home. And a big shout out to both Pratt Homes and American Homes, both companies here in Tyler, Texas, that very generously for 2 years in a row, we convinced them to bring us a modular home on campus, and we turned it into a multiple homicide scene 2 years in a row. So that was very exciting, and we got recognition for just all of our efforts and our student efforts in that endeavor.
You know, when I think about what you've just said about the science of why, how to take apart a crime, I mean, I can't help but think of Agatha Christie murder mysteries about,
Yes.
and really the novelty or the greatness about her is she wrote a very tight story, but it was all about putting the crime together or taking apart everybody's alibis and comparing them to find out where the inconsistencies were.
We did some of that where we set up characters, and we had student volunteers who would play the suspects, and then we'd have folks that would play red herrings to throw off our investigators.
Mm-hmm.
And we created these dynamic backgrounds for everybody, and our students were really great and just sort of embodying the role. So if this person was part of this gang or this person was off selling drugs, like they really had fun with it and got to play around with it. And basically it became a big version of the board game Clue.
Oh, yeah.
Put out different pieces of evidence, and we knew ultimately where we wanted our participants to go. But it was just such an amazing thing where we were able to lay down evidence, and we got to watch people who potentially had no idea what they were doing beyond watching CSI and things. We're just talking about regular community members and their families from Tyler who decided, hey, this sounded fun. I want to learn more about forensic science, and I'm going to show up on a Saturday and try and solve this murder. So we just had evidence everywhere, and the same thing where everybody thought they were this amateur sleuth,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of came through and tried to figure out what was going on.
Well, if you were to describe, a degree in criminology at UT Tyler, how would you describe that?
Our degree program is really, we have tried hard to create something that would work both for the student and for the community at large.
Mm-hmm.
So we are working to train the next generation of criminal justice professionals, and we don't take that very lightly. That's a huge responsibility. And we're not even talking about like the academy trainings and things that they will
Sure.
go through with their respective agencies. We're just talking about the basic inherent ethical values that we want our students to get, the base knowledge in terms of theories, how to look at data and how to analyze that, interpret that, and make that work for them so that they can become the best professionals that they can be. And our degree really works best for the student in terms of the careers that they want. So if you want to go into policing, we're going to let you take as much policing as you want. If you want to go to grad school or you want to go to law school, then let's get you in some
Hmm.
pre-law classes and let's get you where you need to be. Do you want to go work a crime scene? You want to learn how to pick up fingerprints and do those sort of analysis and do ballistics testing? Well, let's get you more forensic science courses and let's get you in a track that's going to work the best for you. So our program really, it gives you the core inherent things that we want you to learn. There's a major curriculum that everybody will go through, but then it becomes very self-selective and very advantageous for whatever you want to do. So if you have no interest in policing, why take courses that aren't going to benefit you? College educations are expensive enough, so get what is going to benefit you the most.
My wife is also an attorney, and this is her undergraduate degree as well. So she's a staff attorney for one of the United States magistrate judges at the federal courthouse here in Tyler. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm an attorney, but my undergraduate degree is political science, as well as some other things. But so I think this is a great foundation for going to law school. It's a great foundation. But I would say anything that teaches you to write is a good foundation for law school. Um, but yeah, what have y'all seen as a result of this movement or push to defund the police? Have you seen enrollment drop any as a result of that, or interest in going pursuing the police part of the degree fall at all?
I would say no. If anything, our major is just continuing to grow year
Hmm.
after year. And our Homeland Security track that has the
Hmm.
most of our policing courses is one of our strongest concentrations. I think people that go into fields like policing, it's not an easy job by any stretch of the imagination. There's a lot of, physical danger, emotional strain. People that are called to that pretty much know early on that this is my calling and this is what I want to do for my chosen career. And they're not very deterred depending on whatever's going on. We still see folks that just come through and they know from day one, this is what I want to do. So, no, I don't really see a drop off in that per se. If anything, the students that are interested in policing have more determination to get in there and maybe make the system better or be part of the solution rather than trying to back away from it. So no, in our experience in our program, I don't really see that happening. It
What
definitely has brought up good conversation in our classes, though. I'll tell you that much.
I mean, I think part of it would be also the part of the country y'all are here in Tyler in Texas, which is a strong um, has strong support for law enforcement. I mean, there's probably only one or two areas of the state where you would even be concerned about that. And so, I think when I'm going to work for somebody, it's really going to be difficult if I don't think they have my back. And so I think if I was looking to go into this area of the law, that'd be one of the things I'd be evaluating. If I have two choices, one that has a strong background in supporting the police and one that has a strong tendency to turn its back or throw the police under the bus, you know which one I'm going to go to.
I think it also helps. We don't have a ton of faculty in the criminal justice program, but the faculty that we have all sort of have different experiences, both in terms of academic and practitioner experience. And two of our faculty actually were former law enforcement
Hmm.
who are now retired and then went back to school, got their PhDs, and are now teaching our students. So we put that experience to use, and we have those gentlemen focusing more in the policing side of courses where they can say, hey, this is something that I saw, this is something that I experienced, this is how I handle it. And this is sort of how I have seen policing evolve, especially in a post 9/11 era, right? Where me personally, I've never been a law enforcement officer, so I couldn't go in and share those same similar stories. But students really seem to resonate and resonate with the faculty that have that sort of policing experience. And those individuals almost can serve as mentors, really, for how to go about that process and how to navigate that stress and really just provide firsthand experience to students that might not have otherwise gotten it.
I'm a father of two daughters, and so I've always said very early, you are a strong, independent woman, so you can carry your own suitcase, or you
Yes.
can do this, or you can do that. So, tell me about how you got into this criminal justice degree. How did you decide, hey, I want to get a degree in criminal justice?
I can proudly say that I've sort of grown up in a criminal justice field. I actually am a transplant from Florida. I grew up in very, very South Florida, just, a couple. I grew up in Cape Coral, Fort Myers, which is just slightly above the Everglades. So we're talking about really South Florida. And my mother, in fact, used to work for federal pretrial. She's now since retired,
Hmm.
but worked there pretty much my entire life while we lived in Florida. And I like to say that I sort of grew up in the courthouse. So I was able to go and attend court. And as long as I was quiet and respectful, which of course I was able to see anything and everything. Judges knew me and the marshals knew me. And,
Hmm.
I just ran around and I was always just so interested in it. And then when I went to college, it was so weird because it never even occurred to me at first that this is what
Hmm.
I should pursue until I took that intro to criminal justice class. And it was like a light bulb went off. And I'm like, everything you're saying makes sense to me and is of interest to me. And it was just sort of something that while I had grown up around it, I sort of stumbled into it. And the more I learned, the more I wanted to keep learning. And so that went from a bachelor's degree straight into graduate school, straight into more studies.
Sure.
And now I teach it for a living, and I can't imagine doing anything else since what's
I
going
can
on.
just hear some of the conversations you had with your parents because I had the same conversations because I have an undergrad, a master's degree in education, then a law degree. My parents are like, "You're just a professional student." And I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, "No, professional students never graduate. I keep graduating. By
Yes,
definition, that's not a professional student."
yes. But it's funny because I've never not been in school, either as a
Hmm.
student or a professor. I have always, since I enrolled or since kindergarten, I've never not had a school year in some way because I went straight from bachelor's into my graduate
Hmm.
program, into my work at UT, and I've already been here for about 10-ish years. So I keep having school years and I love it. And it's a lot of fun.
When I was preparing for today, I like to do a lot of research. And so I told you before we started, I had pages and pages of notes and I started paring it down because I'm like, well, it can't go 3 hours.
Right.
But I found a syllabus that you did that you
Uh-huh.
have for a graduate seminar called the Contemporary Crime Theory,
Mhm.
where you talk about the theories of what causes crime and the theories of how we prevent crime. And I thought that would be a great place for us to spend some time. And I
Sure.
kind of want to set this up with, I have a previous podcast where I talked to the sheriff of the Tarrant County Jail, and he said the people in his jail, 80% of them shared three things. One was they had no education.
Hmm.
Two, they had no father in their life. And
Hmm.
number three, they had some outside influence, whether it was gangs, drugs, or mental illness.
Sure.
And so I'm kind of hoping that we can come back and apply the current theories about what causes crime to those condition or those thoughts by the sheriff of Tarrant County. So
Hmm.
kind of let's talk about what are the current theories of what causes crime.
Sure. So that is a very complex question that we could really spend several semesters on. But I guess to preface it, when we're talking about theory, we're really focusing more on the explanations for why the behavior may occur or
Hmm.
why people might abstain from it, compared to more of criminal justice study, where we're studying like in institutional settings or the behaviors of the actors in the systems themselves. So when we're talking about theory, there's a few different purveying thoughts. Traditionally, we always, from a legal standpoint, the idea of deterrence has always been a strong theory, but not necessarily one that focuses or applies to everyone. So when you create a criminal law, right, there's the idea that something is outlawed, there's a sentence or a penalty that is being applied to it. And then as a sort of actor in that equation, I have to make a value judgment as to whether or not it is likely that I'm going to get caught. How
Hmm.
quickly is it that I'm going to get a sentence applied to me? And whether or not that's even going to happen. So if you think about things like death row, right? The implementation of the death sentence or the death penalty is not a quick process by any means. So if someone is using that as their deterring factor, well, I might sit on death row for 10 plus years. I might get off on appeal. I might do whatever, right? So the idea of the death penalty might not be a deterring factor for me, or the idea of an incarceration sentence might not be
Mhm.
that big of a deterring factor for me, especially if I am what we call like revolving door offenders, where I go in, I
Sure.
get out, and I go right back in. I'm not going to be deterred no matter what. People who are deterred are already inherently deterred. There's something in me that is not going to go out and commit crime because I have too much to lose, because I was raised a certain way. I have certain values and ethics and whatever it may be. So you could have the harshest penalty possible. It doesn't matter because I'm not going to do it to begin with.
When I talk to people about crime, and I always talk about, okay, we're doing these things. We're calling it criminal justice reform, bail reform, whatever we call it. And I'll even say, okay, what you're doing may be good intent with a good intention. You're tying the hands of judges so they cannot force someone who's poor to stay in jail.
Right.
But what you're not realizing is when you tie the hands of judges so that they cannot keep poor people in jail, or someone who is poor in jail, which I would dispute. I don't think that happens. But let's say, okay, that's good intention, that's a good rule. But the problem is when you set that rule now applies across the board. It applies to gang members. It applies to career criminals. It applies to organized crime, as long as they're committing the same level of crime.
Sure.
And so, I mean, so when we're talking about what are the causes of crime, it sounds like one of the things you're saying is one of the, are these people just in their own element, not likely to follow the law anyway?
Right. So if that's the point you're coming from, then you now have to say, well, it's not the law, it's not the penalty, it's something else at play. So theoretically, we now have to look at other factors. So as you were talking about before, education is certainly a factor. Family background is another big factor. We know that offenders that come from single family backgrounds, especially ones where there is a mother who's the head of the household, are much more likely to be incarcerated themselves, especially if they have an incarcerated father. We also know that socioeconomic status plays a huge role, and that people from more disenfranchised backgrounds, or I guess more indigent backgrounds, let's say, are more likely to have higher rates of crime and conviction than people from higher socioeconomic statuses. So there's other things at play, to be sure, but still, like, what we know, that people even coming from those backgrounds, there's
Yeah.
still folks that aren't committing crimes. So
Yeah.
something else is at play. So one of the most prevailing theories, there's actually two that often go hand in hand, or sort of duke it out, battle it, to say there's the idea of social bonding theory and then social learning theory. So social bonding theory sort of talks about the idea that if I have an attachment, or if I have social bonds to someone, a family member, a grandparent, a mother, whoever it may be, if I have that strong and stable force in my life that is able to give me some sort of good upbringing, is gonna tell me, teach me right from wrong, whatever it may be, is gonna try and help me in school, is gonna keep me on that right path, is going to get me involved and invested in different things, is going to help my belief system, then the theory says I should not commit crime, right? If I have all of these elements in place
That
to
sounds like
commit.
a biological theory. If you have a strong influence that is religious or moral, then you're less likely to commit crime, no matter your background. But if you have a criminal in your family, you're more likely to be a criminal in your family.
Sure. Except what disputes that is the idea of twin studies. So there
Hmm.
have been many, many studies over the years that if all things are equal in the home, we're being raised the exact same way. What percentage of those twins, do you have the dyad that completely refrains from crime? Do you have the dyad that both of them go into it? Or maybe you have a split and one goes one direction, one goes the other.
Well, and I agree with that, because I've always said, there's nothing that explains when you have like I have three siblings. So there's four of us in our family. My parents had four kids in 2 years and 5 months. My sisters
Mm-hmm.
are twins. They're not identical, they're fraternal.
Mm-hmm.
But um, one of my siblings had a car accident and had a 30-something year prescription drug um, dependency. And um, which, I tried to get her put in jail at one time because that was the poor man's drug rehab at the time. And I don't even think that we have a poor man's drug rehab now. And so I completely agree. You can have four people raised in the same family, but that comes into play, or what my experience is, the jealousies and uh, amongst the kids really plays a big factor. I mean, I have one sibling who would say, they were the oldest, and so I should have never become an attorney because that made him look bad. I mean, all about status, and I'm like, you know, I I raised my family that your success is our success.
Mhm.
It may not be your success. It's this other our youngest kid's success, but that's our success, and we all
Sure.
celebrate each other's success. We
Mhm.
we didn't learn that growing up. We had two coaches as parents, and so everything was
Mhm.
a competition.
Sure, I get, yeah. But that actually provides the perfect segue into the second competing theory. So the idea of social learning theory. This is one of
Hmm.
the strongest theories that we have in our field. And when I say strongest, like it has some of the strongest empirical support. So we run all these studies, and social learning theory over and over again sort of comes out on top in terms of being able to explain the widest breadth of behaviors. And social learning theory really has four elements, and it's nothing about the attachment to a parental figure.
Seems like it's all about peer pressure.
Exactly. That's what it's saying. So as long as I have an attachment to someone, right? If that someone has pro-normative beliefs, I believe in doing well at school, I'm going to abstain from crime, I'm going to listen to my parents, I'm going to do whatever. I'm more likely to emulate their behavior. But if I am hanging out with people, and your peers could be teenage peers, adult peers, it doesn't matter. If you feel the strongest attachment to those individuals, like all learned behaviors. Our children mimic us as they're growing up. They learn to do what we do. We also learn how to do any sort of behavior from those around us. So, right, if you're going to go rob banks, you just don't wake up on a Tuesday and say, I'm going to go rob a bank. You have to learn from someone how to access the bank, how to access the safe, how to do the holdup. Like there's a whole process so you can get away and get caught or not get caught. So, like the idea of crime being a learned behavior, just like anything else, you have to learn it, you have to get better at it, or you're going to keep ending up in an incarcerated setting. So crime very much is a learned behavior in terms of, just like anything else that we do. So the theories kind of butt heads, where one says, if I'm attached in the right way, I'm not going to do it. But the
Hmm.
other theory says, no, 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 no. If I am attached to the right people, sure. But if I'm attached to people who support this, if I'm a drug user who's hanging out with drug users, of course I'm going to continue to use because that is my environment and that's who I'm learning from and mimicking. So those are sort of two of the competing ones that say, it can go in either direction depending on who we're around, who we're learning from, whether or not it's a positive experience that I have, right? The first time I might use a specific substance with my peers, if I don't have a good experience, I might not use that substance again.
Yeah, it's like me. First time I tried beer, I hated it, so I never drank
Right?
beer again.
Right. But if you're spending Sundays watching football, drinking beer with your friends, that beer goes down a lot smoother than, oh, I don't like this. So it really depends on a variety of multidimensional factors. And there's not one theory that it can explain everything.
Sure.
Right. So now what you're seeing is a little bit of everything can be blended together, and people are trying to find almost these hybrid theories that take these different little positive dimensions into account and are trying to find a bigger solution.
Okay, before we get into that though, let's talk about in the criminal justice reform world, in the bail
Mm-hmm.
reform world, the activists on the one extreme. I've heard people say, I've heard people use this, crime is a conflict between classes. So a class conflict theory, that crime is caused by class conflict and that laws are created by those in power to protect their rights and interests. And so really, uh, crime is just trying to break up the class system. And so that's been used as an argument to explain why it took place and why they shouldn't be punished. I mean, is that an actual theory explaining crime?
There are certainly So when we talk about theory, we explore everything all the way back to like um, these gentlemen named Lombroso and Beccaria and
Mm-hmm.
things. I mean, we go back all the way where people would, sort of the idea of eugenics, where like if my forehead was a certain way or my nose was a certain dimension, then I would fit into this idea of a criminaloid. And obviously, we don't use those sorts of theories anymore, but it all sort of builds on this notion that there are differences between us, right? So the idea of classism sort of fits more into like a Marxian type
Oh yeah.
of
Oh,
explanation.
that's a great idea. That's a great response to that, because you think about that and you go, well, if that theory is your theory of crime, you can't have public safety.
Right. Yes, because I come out of the womb with my nose and my forehead and my everything being a certain way. Or I am born into the class structure that I am in. And under the Marxian kind of notion, like I can't come out of it, that the system is keeping me here. So, this is the inevitable outcome for me. But obviously, we don't subscribe to those theories as much anymore. And it has evolved more into like a personal behavior sort of approach. But if you also think about it, some individuals will not ever have an opportunity to commit certain crimes, right? So unless I am in a high ranking white collar position, I'm not going to
Mm.
have an opportunity to commit embezzlement or corporate fraud or corporate espionage or things like this. It doesn't exist as an opportunity for me. But anybody can be a drug offender. Anybody could be a property offender. Anybody could be, a homicide offender, whatever it may be, right? So it's sort of, it is a two-prong answer. So it's not entirely wrong, but it's not entirely right either. So there is an element of economic disparity, I would say, that comes into play if you are rich and you are committing white collar
Yeah, but
crime.
that just means that, I mean, I think that still doesn't explain crime. I mean, you have poor people who have religious family members or an intact family. They're never going to commit crime. I mean, honestly, sometimes I think that is sometimes used as a cop out to explain crime. I think it's much more complex than that.
I don't necessarily think it's a cop out about the crime or the behavior and the offense that was committed.
Mhm.
I often think about the economics post arrest, right?
Mhm.
So if I am from a higher socioeconomic background, I'm probably providing a private attorney that I've retained versus a public defender who has a stronger caseload. I'm probably going to be more likely to be able to plea bargain out and maybe get a reduced sentence or something that my attorney has more time to spend on this with me rather than just take the sentence and run. And nothing against public defenders. We have the resources that we have, right? But I often think about it more in the economics post arrest. So, what do the conviction rates look like? What do the sentences look like? And where does money come into play there? Because I could commit a crime and someone else could commit the exact same offense, but there is more ambiguity in the post arrest factors when you look at things like socioeconomic status, gender, race, all of those things. That's where you start to see more of the disparities pop up.
But when we jump, I mean, to me, okay, that jumps to punishment or deterrence, and I know we're going to talk about that in a minute, but it seems like that's the whole purpose of the criminal justice system. So if I'm a first time offender, I get less of a punishment,
Mhm.
and because I'm a first time offender, and if I'm a second time offender, a third time offender, we're supposed to. Our system, I thought, was based on we would apply more pressure, but we're kind of entering into this period right now where we can't treat anybody. We have to treat everybody the same, or otherwise we have some evidence of some systemic problems that gets us into a whole nother discussion, which shuts down the whole debate.
See, this is something that I also challenge my students on because when we look at crime, it's a multifaceted approach and multifaceted problem. So, okay, now let's say all things are equal and we have both been sentenced. We're in incarceration sentence settings, and now it's time to come out. So now, what does reentry look like? Right.
Mhm.
So if I have resources and I have family members that have stuck by me and have decided, hey, you can come home here, you can live with us, we will bring you back into the fold, and sort of reintegrate you. This is also another branch of theory. So the idea of reintegrative or
Mhm.
deintegrative shaming. So I have judged your crimes, I have judged your actions, but I am still accepting of you as a person. So if I have those resources to come home to, and I have family members that are going to help me find housing, help me find employment, versus some folks that, the gates open and out you get, here's a couple bucks and a bus ticket, and I'm returning home to the same crime driven environment with no support system, then of course, right? Now the chances of me recidivating are extremely high. If I'm going to recidivate, no matter what type of offender I am, the first 6 months post release is when it's going to happen. And that's when folks are the most desperate. That's where they are the most or the least resourceful in terms of being able to find employment, being able to find housing stability, all of those things, right? So it's not just the offense, it's a
We
multi-dimensional
we know
issue.
we have recidivism that's being looked at very highly right now. We've got a lot of studies coming out during as a result of COVID, looking at simple release mechanisms, pre-conviction. There's this whole argument that, oh, everybody wants to resolve their criminal case, so we don't need to require them to have a surety bond or whatever, and they'll just come back. And not only are the studies showing that's not true because it has a high failure to appear rate. I mean, if we look at Houston for releasing misdemeanors on personal bonds has an 80% failure to appear rate. We think, oh, that's an ungodly number. Can't be correct. That's what's happening in California in all misdemeanor courts because they use simple release as well. But we now have studies showing that comparing the release of someone on a surety bond versus someone released on simple release, and there's a study out of Yolo County, California, showing that that difference, the person on simple release had a 200% greater chance of committing a new violent offense in the next 18 months compared to someone who was released on a surety bond. And I agree with what you're saying. I think that difference is the family involvement. The family, someone saying, you still have value, we still are sticking up for you. And that has a big deterrent offense on them over the next 18 months.
Sure. And sentencing plays a part in that in terms of the family dynamic. Research has suggested that if my family is going to hang on and sort of support me, 3 years is about the limit. That's where we start to see the drop off, where individuals who are incarcerated for longer than 3 years, and of course, that time is also dependent on the proximity to my incarcerated setting. So let's say I am hours and hours away from where my family lives. They don't have the resources, they don't have the time, the ability to come visit me as often. That 3 years might be a significantly shorter amount of time. But if you're incarcerated for, I don't know, let's say 10, 15 years, during that amount of time, as an adult, are my parents still alive? Do my
Mhm.
siblings want me to come home? How do I
Yeah.
explain this to my existing family that uncle, brother, whoever has been gone for this amount of time and now is back in our lives, right? So there's so many different things at play, but the longer and longer we're incarcerated, the less and less likely it is that that support system will exist post release. And about 3 years is the limit.
Okay, so let's go back to my example. The sheriff
Mhm.
of Tarrant County says that 80% of his jail population share three things: no education, no father, and some outside influence, whether it be uh, gangs, drugs, or mental health issues. I mean, it seems like, uh, the two theories that we've talked about is the social binding theory and the social learning theory really both would apply to that if you don't have an education. And what I would look at is in our urban areas. I think in our urban areas, our inner cities, we have a big crime problem. But it seems like in those areas we've also failed people on their education because we have a high dropout area. We have a substantial drug problem and in our inner city. So I mean, what are we teaching people? What do we need to do? Is it we need to do a better job on education? It didn't seem like we're doing that.
Sure. I mean, education is one of the hardest ones to sort of tackle because you're right, and especially in inner urban areas, you do see high rates of dropout. You see people who are not returning in adulthood, And this has always been sort of a sticky issue or an argumentative issue. But one of the things that we used to do to make up for education is the idea of prison education. So back in the day, I mean, you used to be able to go through correspondence courses and go all the way and get a PhD while you are incarcerated. And now in some settings, we're lucky if we can provide a GED experience. But if you have folks who have no education and then they're incarcerated in the formative years of their adulthood and they come out, now I have no formal education from school, and I've missed out on all of these years in which I have, you know, that life experience or that life education in my early 20s and 30s of what it means to be an adult who is responsible and learns how to pay my bills and raise my children and all of this. So you're coming out, and now my education and my life experience are both stunted. And how do I make up for that in my 40s and my 50s and my 60s, right? So education is a huge one. But without any sort of prison programming or vocational trade or things like that, it's very hard to come out and then expect someone to go get a job and expect them to get their life together when they have been, you know, locked up for all this time.
Well, what do we do though to stop it from happening? What are we doing in our elementary school or middle school or high schools in the urban areas? What programs are there that we can point to say, hey, you need to be doing these things so that we have fewer dropouts, so that we can emphasize to families the importance that education is the ultimate equalizer?
That is a hard question to answer because I mean, we can see it even just here in East Texas, how especially COVID really showed it to us, how you know, we are one drastic life experience away from having everything uprooted and everything upturned. And when teachers have huge class sizes, they don't have the resources that they need. And I know in this last legislative session, there were efforts to try and make that a little bit better for our teachers. But you have so many students packed into a room and you have 1 to 2 teachers handling all of them. It's not difficult for students to fall through the cracks, even if we don't want that to happen. So you can imagine how much more amplified and how much more magnified that is when you're in inner city schools that have, you know, don't have the infrastructure to be able to do this. And teachers often are doing the best that they can, but you know, it's still not enough in many of these instances. So then you have students and families that are trying to rely, once again, coming to this idea of bonding. So when I get out of school, what do I got to get you into to make sure you're off the streets and you're away from these
from my experience in some of our urban cities, we're seeing is we're dumbing down the education instead of pushing up. And so, and you know, you'll see whole classes that are behind on, they're not on reading level or they're
sure.
not on math level. And it seems like that while that may have been well intentioned, they're lowering the standards so more people can be successful, but that's actually dumbing down the whole class and making it more likely that we have a cyclical problem, because even if they graduate, they don't have the skills to function in society.
Right. Yeah. We have just sort of passed them through to get them out and say, okay, you've made it. Yeah. I mean, it sort of goes to the idea of these supplemental programs. So after school, especially when you are in those formative teenage years, can I get you into like a secondary vocational program? Can I we have programs around here and my children are in the White House School District here in Tyler. But like there's, you know, sports, there's welding, there's 4-H, all these different things that happen after school, that students now have a secondary release or they have a secondary mentorship program. Mom and dad are gone, working, whatever. Now I have a pro-social thing that I can attach myself to. So research says, especially when you're talking about these series, the education is one part of it and the content is one part of it. But for me, math, like, okay, yeah, I mean, we all need to know math, but my students are going to remember the coach or the mentor or the whoever who was getting me through what I needed to get through rather than the math equation that I'm going to forget 10 years down the line. So the content is drastically important, and I'm not downplaying that by any means. But what we're seeing, at least from the CJ side, is the human element that still needs to be there. Because students, I mean, I could put you in a classroom, I could get a butt in a chair, I could have you have a book open, but are you retaining and getting that information? I don't know. But after school, in those peak hours where you are most likely to do something deviant, if I put you in a
Mhm.
program, a YMCA program, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, whatever it may be, when you put students in these clubs or in these things that they have, like, this is my way out. It might not be math, but it could be soccer, it could be football, it could be whatever, it could be
Mhm.
band. When you put kids in those types of programs, that's where you're seeing more of the success lie. Not in the, and it's sad to say, the academics are one part, but it's this social element where I have accountability.
Well, they're learning to function as a team. I mean, I
Yes,
think that's the great thing about band. You have to learn how to work as a team to do whatever you're doing, to sound like a group.
yes.
I think of my two children, my oldest daughter, who is graduated from Baylor, but when she was at that formative age, I tried everything to get her excited about reading, and
Mm-hmm.
nothing I tried worked. I mean, not one thing. I mean, I offered her $5 a book for Nancy Drew books, and she didn't read one, but she finally had a teacher who just got her excited about reading. And then I think about my youngest daughter who had a bone marrow transplant when she was 5, and so she missed half of kindergarten and half of first grade. And so we initially were going to hold her back for second grade, and then at the very last minute, my wife called an audible, and we kept her in second grade. And let's level readers. And so every night she and I did level readers, and we worked for the entire year to get her caught up on reading. And that
Mm-hmm.
was a great experience, I think, for us and for our relationship. But because I'll never forget it, I'll be talking about it probably on my deathbed, doing level readers all year long. But for parents, you just got to search and try and find and be willing to do anything until you get that connection.
Yes, absolutely. And sometimes, I hate to say it, it's not even about the connection that they have with us. I mean, that is at the end of the
Mhm.
day the most important part. But sometimes our children see us as the man or see us as the establishment that they're trying to get away from. Especially if you have a rebellious child, right? Sometimes you need that outside adult who is not the heavy at home, but who is confirming that, yeah, your parents are right, your parents are trying to get you a better life, they're not trying to be mean, they're not trying to be hard. Sometimes it's that connection to an outside adult that really puts it into perspective for a lot of kids that, oh man, you know, I'm not, I am special to my family, but I'm not special in terms of the other people of this class. I have to work as a team. I have to be a good citizen. I have to be a good classmate who is respectful of others. And they're right, and sometimes kids, that light bulb never comes on and we see the deviancy just continue and go. But for others, it's that outside confirmation that someone else, a different authority figure, is holding me responsible and holding me accountable for it.
Well, and I think it's so important for self-esteem. To have someone in your family say, you have value. I love you. You can be productive. I mean, uh, I always had a dream of going to law school, but I didn't have a goal. And until I set it as a goal and worked towards my goal, I wasn't going to get in. I mean, my
Mm-hmm.
grades weren't good enough for me to get into law school. So I had to figure out how to work around that. And I did it by getting a master's degree. But, I don't think we teach kids today about the importance of figuring out where you fit in and becoming self-sufficient. I mean, we kind of need to move on, but I mean, we've talked about all the different causes or the current theories of the causes of crime, and so let's kind of transition and talk about what are the current theories of how we prevent crime. Um, I mean, and like mental health. I mean, mental health is a huge problem. In the Harris County Jail is the largest mental health facility in the state, and it's part of a jail. Where does mental health fit in our theory of crime and crime prevention?
So I wouldn't say there's a specific theory that addresses mental health individually. But what I would say is that it's sort of interwoven with everything
Hmm.
that we are talking about. Because as we were saying before, sometimes you need that person that says, it's okay. You are accepted and loved for who you are. Even if that includes a mental health condition or a chronic health condition. And you're right, our prisons and our jails are some of our leading mental health hospitals and access
Sure.
places to treat these programs. And that might be the first opportunity that someone has even been diagnosed or gets some sort of
Yeah, but the
pharmaceutical.
jails were never meant for that. It
No,
creates a revolving door because you
yeah,
get arrested, you get in, oh, they discover that you're off your meds, they get you on your meds, you get balanced, you get under control, you get released, and then you get off your meds, and it's just a revolving door.
right. Exactly. But for me, again, like I said, I think it brings into the idea of reentry. So if, and jails are not the place for it because you're just there to
Yeah.
temporarily. And prisons are really more the environment in which these things can be done a little bit better, a little bit more successfully because of the time element. But the idea that when you are released as a correctional system, can I put you in the path or send you, maybe the next place is a halfway house, maybe the next place
Hmm.
is to a mental health treatment facility that can get you the tools and resources that you need. Maybe that then becomes the responsibility of your supervision officer post release. And that's a huge burden to put on those folks because they
Sure.
already have a tremendous caseload. But you have POs that specialize in mental health clients, right? So I can put you in a position where I can get you into this treatment service. I can get you to the treatment provider that you need. But then insurance, money, all of that stuff comes into play. And if I'm just trying to get my bills paid, my mental health treatment or my counseling services might be the last thing that I'm thinking about.
Well, we're having this big debate right now about whether crime is really going up or whether there's just a perception problem. And I like to when you look at national statistics, they kind of are showing that crime is either static or going down. But when you look in our urban areas, there seems to be pretty strong evidence that crime is going up, especially when the NAACP in Oakland is demanding a state of emergency on crime. How do we? What are the current theories of how we deter crime?
So, I mean, we deter by the environment, right? Um, so, if you're talking about inner city areas that are very crime ridden or have very visible forms of crime, because we know that crime's happening in the suburbs, we know that it's happening, it's just not as visible. But in urban areas, it's much more detectable because it's happening in the streets, it's happening on front porches. But in
We
more,
have much more crime committed in our urban areas, don't we?
oh, absolutely, there
I mean,
is,
there's a
a larger,
higher the population is more dense there, so you're going to
yeah.
have more crime.
Yes, by population, it is going to happen more often, but it is also going to be more detectable, right? So if I'm a drug user, I might be doing it in a visible place. If I'm in the suburbs, I might be doing it in my home or I might be doing it in my back porch or some place that's a little bit less conspicuous. So not to say it's not happening in the suburbs, it's just it's happening more frequently and much more visibly in these urban areas. So when you have these environments, there is a criminological theory called broken windows.
Yes,
So the idea, if you're familiar,
became very very familiar during when it was used in New York. Now it's a
yes,
dirty word, and I would say it's a dirty word because it was so successful in New York.
right. So the idea for listeners who might not know what we're talking about, the idea that if someone breaks my window and I don't repair it because the house is vacant or I don't have the resources to repair it, it very quickly people see that it's not being fixed, another window gets broken, and then the area becomes progressively more dilapidated and less taken care of. Crime rates increase because there's no suitable guardians or visible enforcement, and it then becomes a hot spot. So, excuse me, to get back to this idea of crime in the urban areas, when we have this idea of less enforcement and less detection, it's going to just keep populating. So do we just send more police patrols around? Well, we do that, and crime keeps happening. People still aren't as deterred, or they now figure out how to do it better and in a more inconspicuous way. So it's there's no one set answer. If someone had the one answer, we probably would have already
We'd
done
be
it
billionaires.
already. Yeah.
we
So it depends on so many different factors, and every urban area is not identical to every other urban area. So
Well, a
what my
sense of community would be one way to decrease crime because everybody has a sense that is their community.
Mhm.
Uh, but when when schools are already failing, families are already failing, drugs are already pervasive in the neighborhood, then you don't have any of that. And so, um, I mean, look at what they did in New York. They decided by referendum to change certain felonies to misdemeanors. One of them be theft under $950 or less. And then in our urban areas, we had DAs that decided we're no longer going to prosecute theft under $950. And so now I mean, you would argue, well, crime's going down because it's no longer a crime. But that seems to not be, I mean, I think what we've learned in the interim is that's not decreasing crime. That's actually increasing crime.
I would agree with that. We're basically just changing what we call it. But there's also increases in disorder, right? So it's not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
just the crime that is the issue, but the disorder in these areas plays a huge role and just basically becomes or allows more opportunity for the crime to occur, especially when things are boiling over or you have a tough economic setting. You're going to have things that boil over a little bit faster. We're in a time of inflation. We're seeing
Mm-hmm.
crime increase in terms of both property types of offenses and some different types of theft. But if they're not arresting, they're not convicting. We see it in California, especially in San Francisco now. It's becoming so bad that businesses are just leaving the area because they can't control it. You see on the news that these mobs are just breaking into department stores, and how, as mall security or store security or single officers, how do you control a mob that is grabbing and running?
Well, so let me ask you that. So, with what they're doing in those areas, is there any theory of crime or crime deterrence that we can point to say what they're doing will reduce crime? I don't think there is.
Not one single one that would account for all of what's happening. Um, there's so many multi-factors, especially in urban areas. There is more distrust of the police.
Mm-hmm.
So there is, I don't want to say sabotage, but there is more, like, people won't talk to the police. If I'm
Sure.
trying to investigate something, I'm going to be quiet and I'm going to keep it to myself because I'm in the neighborhood and
Well,
you're
that
not
makes the problem
qualifying
even worse
me.
because we have fewer reported crimes. So the crimes,
Sure.
I mean, we have, and I always say as crime goes up, the people that are being impacted the worst are the people that live in those communities. So if we have a minority community in our urban areas, which we mostly do, the crime is going to be will go up even more with them because crime goes up in our minority communities quicker than the community average.
Yes, when you have these socioeconomic areas that are just lower all across the board, you do end up seeing increases in crime. You see increases in arrest, increases in conviction, and compared to other areas. But again, the population is more dense. You see, it's more visible. There's more visibility to it. The detection is a little bit easier in terms of for law enforcement than something that is maybe hidden that I got to go get a warrant for. I got to get into your house, whatever it may be. If you're doing it on the street in plain view, that's a little bit easier for me to detect. So we have things going on in these areas that might not be happening in other parts of the state or, even just 30, 50 miles away.
Well, it seems like we've seen the benefits of, if you identify an area that has higher crime, putting more officers on the ground there or in that area actually does positively lower crime.
Yeah, so one of the tools that we have at our disposal, and this is one of the things that we do in our program, it's called GIS. I think it's, and I apologize if this is not correct, but I think it's Geographic Information Systems. I don't teach the class. I don't know how to do it. But basically, it would allow us to configure a bunch of different data points and figure out hotspots of crime. So if we know this area, there's a large amount of arrest, a large amount of detection happening, and it's a higher crime ridden area, then that's the areas in which we send more of our resources to. We deploy more officers. We do more in these areas. And that's one of the things that our students get to learn in our program. We actually have a geographer named Corey Sills in our program, and she is fantastic. And she uses the tools in her geography program to teach our criminal justice students, this is how you triangulate, this is how you create hotspots. So the idea of interdisciplinary tools are really useful and helpful to law enforcement, to our students, and really sort of target and show areas of high concentration.
Seems like when we have attempted that in the past, then the attack is that you're profiling, you're racial profiling. And so it seems like when we're teaching that today, we have to also teach how to defend against allegations that you're not racially profiling. You're just looking at hotspots of where crime is being committed, and you're not looking at the race of anybody that's committing the crime. I mean, I'm not saying that the arguments were valid when they were being made. It just seems like any criminal theory or prevention theory that has any success will ultimately be attacked in some way to try to force the police to no longer use it.
Well, that is also sort of our responsibility as criminal justice educators, right? Because we know in the past, data has shown that, you know, whether or not you believe it's still occurring, in the past, we have had disproportionate stops of minority suspects in different areas, different settings for different types of offenses. But as criminal justice educators, it's now our job to sort of highlight the mistakes of the past. And we do the best with what we can with the tools that we have. But when we know better, we should do better. So it is our job as criminal justice educators to say, hey, you know.
But here's the point I would make on that, though. There's a new study from Minnesota that looked at the racial demographic of the person reporting the crime and the person who was accused of the crime. And it tracked for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
And so the argument is, we have a disproportionate amount of a number of one minority group in prison in the state of Minnesota. And so the study looked at, well, do we really have a disproportionate number of one minority group in prison? And what the study found was for that year, there was a vast disparity in the number of crimes being reported from that racial group against people in that racial group. So for that 1 year study, and I think they are looking to update it, I think it was 2021 or 2022, they found a disproportionate amount of crime being committed by that minority group. So here's my point. My point would be, when those arguments are made that we've made mistakes in the past, those arguments are only true if we did not have a disproportionate amount of crime being committed with that minority group. If that argument is not true, then what you're saying is correct. If the studies are showing that we have a disproportionate number of crimes being committed by one minority group, then to enact policies that addresses that actually harms that minority group even more, because the victims are by and large from that same minority group. And the number one thing I use is look at murder victims. In the United States, 50% of all murder victims are young Black males. And by and large, they're being killed by young Black males. And so for whatever reason in our urban areas, we have decided to pick the murderer over the murder victim, and we're favoring them in a lot of these criminal justice reforms, and they don't make sense to me, or that does not make sense.
So I would say that is not necessarily a new concept, the idea that individuals typically will commit crimes against individuals who share the same race. But if you think about many domestic violence situations or homicides or things like that, where I might know that person or I'm related to that person, it's not an outlandish thing that we might share the same race. So that is not a new concept. We've been talking about that for many, many years. But the disproportionate part of it comes from the amount of folks that live in your area compared to the amount of folks who are being incarcerated that are of a specific race, right? So if you, in Minnesota, I haven't looked at this report. I haven't seen this individual's findings. I haven't looked at his or her methodology or anything like that. So I can't make any comments about those findings. But when we're talking about disproportionate things, right, the idea that if all things are being equal and one group is being disproportionately sentenced more than the other, then the law is really failing. And it doesn't, and I understand your point about the offender versus the victim, but as an American who has the same constitutional rights as everybody else, if something is happening more often to one group than another and all things are being equal, what is that saying? Is that the sentencing policies that we have? Is it the guidelines? Is it your idea or your notion before that we're taking too much discretion away from judges? But if you look specifically in the South, prior to the implementation of both the federal and many state sentencing guidelines, you saw that disparity happening a lot more across the board for all types of offenses. So in some ways, the guidelines help to level that out, but now it has become so restrictive and mandatory minimums have become so intense in some ways that that discretion is almost completely gone. And I know that post Booker, we have now allowed judges a little bit more leeway within the sentencing guidelines and things like that. But still, that discretion is sort of gone. And there's not much you can do in terms of helping to alleviate that.
It seems like we're always going to have a problem if we compare the size of a race in prison versus the general population. It seems like the comparison should be, let's look at the population of criminals or people who are committing crimes, and sometimes historically that's been hard to figure out. I think that was one of the great things about this report from Minnesota. The guy who did the report was on the podcast, and he even looked at as after arrest as they went through the criminal justice system, and the people who were of that minority group, their result actually improved as they went through the criminal justice system, showing that they were getting probably more favorable treatment than other races after they got to the criminal justice system. But I think the better comparison is not percentage of people in prison versus general population. It's people in prison versus the people who are committing crime, and maybe that's a harder number to get to. But I think when we fall into a trap when we say that. But I kind of want to talk about one more thing, because I think when we were having our email exchange, you were talking, and I have a specific question. It's the reason why I want to bring it up. You said one of your specialties was the sexual registries.
Yes.
That we have in the United States, those laws that pass. Now, I am such an old attorney. I mean, I've been practicing law for 30 something years. So I remember when those were passed. And I remember when those were argued at the U.S. Supreme Court on whether they were constitutional. And because, like I said, I love to look at appellate issues, legal issues. And I was convinced when that case was argued that those registries were going to be held unconstitutional, because you're requiring somebody who has paid their debt to society to continue to be punished. And so, and then we're now saying, we kind of have this theory in criminal justice reform that we can't hold people responsible for actions they committed before 25 because their brain's not fully developed. But then conversely, we allow kids to have certain drugs that will change their sex, even though they're less than 25. I mean, what is your what is your views on the sex registries from the standpoint of the constitutionality and whether they've been a good thing?
So from to begin with, constitutionally, one of the arguments that came out, especially after the passage of the Adam Walsh Act in 2006, that was the one that sort of blew it all open and became more encompassing than the prior laws. So really federally, it began with Jacob Wetterling. It came out of Minnesota and then went up federally, and Megan's Law then sort of allowed for notification purposes. But the Adam Walsh Act of 2006 sort of blew it open. And there was a clause in there that basically said, if you weren't on the registry before, you are on the registry now, and sort of made it a retroactive type of thing. And so to an extent, it overly inflated the registry numbers, because it went back and grabbed a bunch of folks who hadn't committed another offense. Maybe I did something in the 70s and 80s when the registries weren't a thing, and now I'm registered. So the idea of the retrospective idea, I thought was going to be overturned under ex post facto laws, but it didn't really seem to pan out that way. But the courts really said this is not a criminal action, or a criminal sanction rather. It's a civil matter that is a public safety element. But what's going to be very interesting, in the last year, the state of Montana actually just said that their version of the registry does violate ex post facto laws and is being considered unconstitutional. So now the state has an opportunity to appeal. I don't know what will happen after that.
But it seems like that that's one of those situations where I might think the law should be held unconstitutional, but the politics are heavily against holding
Oh,
them unconstitutional because
yeah.
but it seems like from my standpoint what the argument is there are crimes that certain people commit
Mhm.
when they're convicted that shows that they have an issue that they are going to have the rest of their life. And that's the reason why we put them on a registry because we want people to know. Well, that seems like that would apply. I mean, that theory of certain people who commit crimes are going, that shows that they're going to have some type of problem the rest of their life and kind of supports this notion of why we need prisons.
Mhm. But so to play devil's advocate, I've been studying sex offender registries for my entire career.
I know
What,
that's why I brought it up.
yes, what you typically see from registered persons is not necessarily a secondary sexual offense. So if there's going to be an arrest or a
Mm,
subsequent conviction, it's most likely for a technical violation related to registration. So most registered persons at the time
yes.
of conviction go through a risk assessment. And some states do not even choose to publicly register very low risk offenders. So it's a very complicated situation because basically there's 50 different state registries plus what Adam Walsh requires. And very few states are in full compliance, Texas included, with with the Adam Walsh Act. So the Adam Walsh Act requires that you be categorized in one of three tiers. Tier one being the least risky, tier three being the most likely that you would commit another sexual offense. California and several other states do not publicly list tier one offenders. So law enforcement has that information. You are a registered person with the state, but regular community members cannot get that information unless they go to law enforcement. And that is specifically done to highlight the people that are most likely to reoffend and to try and limit some of the confusion that happens with the low level individuals who are just, I'm on the registry. It's not necessarily for life. I might be on for 10 years and then I get off. Texas is also a 10-year state or a lifetime state. Most of our registered persons fall into that lifetime category. And there are ways to get off the registry, but it's hoops and hoops and hoops and red tape, and often does not become a reality for many registered persons. We do have that mechanism, but I think sometimes when you put everybody under this umbrella of lifetime registration, I might be thinking, okay, this is more of a predator type of person, or who fits that stereotype rather than someone who maybe did one thing in the 90s or the 80s and now has to be there the rest of your life. It also gets compounded when you put things like travel into play. So I think I mentioned earlier, I came from Florida. Florida is one of the least friendly states in terms of their registry. There are registered persons on the Florida registry that are listed as deceased, and they are still registered. If you go for a short stay in all states, you have to register. If you're going to be there for longer than a certain amount of time, you have to check in. So if I go to Florida for a week, I'm still on their registry. It does not go away. So some of these people aren't even living there, but it makes it seem like, oh, we have a massive problem. And by no means am I downplaying the severity of sex crimes or anything like that. But that is not an accurate representation if if the person is deceased or not even living there. So there
I,
definitely needs to be some cleanup in that regard.
I saw a case recently where a guy was in prison for 10 or 20 years and was required to register, and he refuses. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he's been arrested, charged, and convicted 3 times and gone back to prison for a period of time for refusing to register. And essentially, they're just choosing to not charge him anymore because I mean, I think the last time they arrested him, they sent him for a mental evaluation because he just has it in his head, I'm not going to register. If you want to send me back to prison, fine. And I think he probably has finally won because they don't want to send him back to prison. They don't want to take up the space just
Right.
because he won't register. But I mean, we've talked forever today and it's been great discussion. But if you were going to say, look, here's some one or two things that we could do to decrease crime in our urban areas.
Mhm.
What would those be?
So I really think going back to this idea of attachment and involvement where we have, because deviancy starts in youth, and deviancy, most people will age out of their criminal behavior. Another theory that we didn't touch on, but that we study, is the idea of life course criminology. And normally there's a trajectory where we sort of peak in terms of our criminality in our early 20s, and by our early 30s we start to age out, and normally our crime ends. So it's essential that in these areas we have to target young adults. That is the target population that we have to try and help and address no matter what. And most of the time it is giving them some sort of pro-normative outlet to crime. If I don't have that stability at home, I have to provide that young
Mhm.
person with stability. If I don't have an economic outlet to provide them or to get what I need, I might turn to crime as that economic outlet. So, how do I give that person the tools, the education, the technical or vocational training they need to build and make a career? So, I really think it comes down to those formative years and trying to get, and it's easier said than done, but trying to get these young adults and teenagers into the proper channels and proper outlets to show that you can get out of this. It's going to be hard, it's going to take work, but there is a way out of this situation. And that, I think, is oftentimes not mirrored enough. And it comes down, time, resources, availability, personnel, but trying to get them in these outlets to show them that there is a different way, or to show them that there is a pro-normative approach rather than just going through
Well, I think
criminal.
that shows the importance of these programs for outlets for, when you're 20 or younger than 20, you just have all this energy. So you got to have outlets for it. I said,
Sure.
we've seen things that have been tried that just seem stupid. And, one of them would be, oh, we're going to pay people to not commit crime. And everything that we've talked about, that doesn't fit. I mean, they're not going to have a connection to money so that they're not going to commit crime. In fact, a connection to money without anything else would probably be a reason for them to commit crime. I think what you've pointed out is the importance of getting a connection to someone in their community or in their family that's going to show them the importance of fitting in, the importance of finding your place, the importance of not committing crime. And
Yeah.
those are the actions that they'll follow. And that seems so easy and so difficult at the same time.
Yes. I mean, on paper and abstractly as we talk about it, it's just, it does sound simple, right? But if you don't have those mechanisms in place, you don't have those
Yeah.
adults, you don't have those mentors, you don't have someone to show you, right? Then I'm going to go find someone who can show me how to do it quick and easy. And I just hope I don't get caught. And maybe the first 3 times I do it, I don't get caught. So now I'm good and I'm learning how to do it better. We got to get them before they start learning how to do it better.
Well, okay, this is going to sound really way out of left field, but I think of programs like Dolly Parton has a program to encourage reading with elementary kids, and she meets with them, or she did for a while, and she offered them, we will give you a scholarship of this amount if y'all too, or if y'all graduate. And so, this connection, you have value, you are worthy. Let us help you. Here are free books. I think that's invaluable. And I don't know how we've lost that track, or we've lost our way so that kids are a burden, and we don't stress them the importance of education. I remember chasing after my kids, we're going to do it this way. How your education is so important. This is
Mhm.
your ultimate equalizer. And I don't, you're driving me crazy right now, but I love you very much. And we need, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And that's probably what a society is. And right now, it just looks like in our urban areas, we're giving up on crime. And that seems like the worst thing we could be doing.
Mm-hmm. It sort of brings me back to the old adage, it takes a village, right, to raise a child. But really, it takes a village to raise a village. And the next generation has to be that village for someone else. And if we're giving up on the current one, what's that going to say for the next one and the next one and the next one? So you're right. I mean, it is difficult. It's not easy. There are some days where, as a parent, you do want to pull your hair out and bust your head against the wall. But tomorrow's a new day, and we try again.
Well, we have
And
to have hope because our
yes,
society demands public safety, and we will either get it from the government or society will break down and they will provide it for themselves. So I always have hope because where we're headed, where we're going is not sustainable. So
mm-hmm,
we will regroup, we will change, we will have public safety because society demands it.
mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, I think so.
Well, thank you so much for visiting with me for this hour, this marathon. No, I loved it. I like talking about these issues. And we were talking about, hey, what should we do? And I'm like, we need to have a criminology professor on there and tell
Yes,
us about the theories of crime. But thank you so much for visiting with me and talking to me about these issues. You could tell I could talk for another hour and I would love it, but it's been great talking to you.
you as well, Ken. Thank you so much for having me and for your listeners to spend this time with us today. And I hope, if anything, maybe we'll have a few new applicants to our criminal justice program at UT Tyler.
Well, and if somebody wanted to find out more information about you or your program, where would they find that information?
Yes, so you could go to just the General University website, and that is www.uttyler.edu. And you can find us there if you just search for criminal justice. As you said at the beginning of the broadcast, I am our undergraduate coordinator, so I would be the point of contact for any freshmen or undergraduate students. And we also offer a graduate program. So if you can't get enough criminal justice, you can come right out of our bachelor's program and head into our completely online master's program. And I have to shout this out because our graduate coordinator has helped us tremendously. And we just found out this last year that our graduate online master's program is one of the top 10 or top 100 programs in the United States. So quality of education when you come to us, and we can continue talking about all these hot topic issues.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you,
Hope to
Ken.
talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening, and come back for the next episode of The Bell Post.